At Arizona State University, we're bringing world-class education from our globally acclaimed faculty to you. Earn your degree from the nation's most innovative university. Online. That's a degree better. Learn more at asuonline.asu.edu.
Welcome, everyone, to Dolls of Our Lives. This is the podcast where we're reliving the American Girl series book by book, except here on Patreon, where we're doing anything that you or we decide is relevant. I'm Mary.
I'm Allison.
And we're here today with some might call it Ancestor Trouble. We're finally getting into genealogy on this show.
I knew this book was Ancestor Trouble when it walked in.
Wow. Yeah, that's so real. You have not been wrapped up in trying to get Taylor Swift tickets, but we might be triggering some people because it's, a lot of people didn't get through. Ticketmaster shut down a lot of dreams in the past few days.
Yeah, it's fascinating because elected officials in my area have finally had something to say about monopolies, and it was in the wake of a Ticketmaster meltdown, probably brought on by someone in their lives. I had no trouble getting this book, which is Maud Newton's Ancestor Trouble. So if you're looking for a lower stakes get, this book is under $30 and you don't have to deal with resale prices.
I mean, that's certainly true. And just like Taylor Swift is going to take you through her eras in that tour, allegedly, which I will sadly not be seeing because I did not get tickets either. This book is a memoir in which Maud Newton takes us through her own life experiences in the process of trying to analyze her own genealogy and sort of reckon with her own family history. So this is a book for someone who's ever wondered, what do I do with my family history? Or how am I processing this? And we will get into that. It's a lot. But I mean, presumably as I was reading this book and as we're approaching Thanksgiving, I'm thinking what is it like around Maud's Thanksgiving table in terms of what she lays out in this book? Is it awkward?
So Maud Newton, as you say, is a writer, and I was listening to interviews with her in preparation for this podcast, and she talks about how her sister is very private. Her sister is not very much into the kind of deep probing that she is. And Maud also cites the fact that she told her whole family she wanted to be a writer from a very young age. And so she basically says they should have behaved better if they didn't want to be in my book, which I think is very Taylor Swift. SAT analogy, Taylor Swift is to ex-boyfriend as Maud Newton is to every ancestor that came before her. I will fully admit I had trouble at times with this book because it is so naked and raw about things in her family history.
Yes. So are we just going into the book right now?
No, we are going to talk about cranberry sauce first.
Okay. Well, because I was going to say that was an issue for me, but an interesting one that we'll get into in a moment. But first, just to say something that is very positive is Thanksgiving, which is coming up, and just curious, what your traditions are, what you're looking forward to. This is my favorite holiday. So I hate when the stores gloss over it to get to Christmas stuff because it's this is it for me. This is my day.
So in my mind, there's multiple Thanksgivings, right? I have said before, I believe on the podcast, that I didn't know that Easter was a religious holiday for many years because in my family, it was all about rabbits and candy and really a wonderful day to celebrate spring and get dressed up. And my dad would make a ham. I had no concept that it had a religious grounding, which is if I wrote my own Ancestor Trouble would probably be a chapter. What is really interesting to me about Thanksgiving is I do think that there are deeply troubling roots of Thanksgiving. And then I also think there's a separate place for a conversation about the food. We can talk about Christianity and talk about peeps as two intertwined things at Easter. I want to talk about stuffing as a thing that I am passionate about, apart from colonization. Is that okay?
Yeah, I'm totally with that. Like, I know you weren't into the Addams Family when we watched it, but in the sequel, Wednesday Addams takes part in like the greatest pageant, Thanksgiving pageant, that really centers the violence of colonialism. And I think that's a really important way to think about Thanksgiving. And I totally hear you. So I engage it as like a food holiday where I see relatives that I mostly enjoy.
So part of why I separate the food from Thanksgiving is my dad will make that meal like every few months throughout the year. Like he made it this summer and I wasn't able to go. So he put the entire meal in an actual like cooler, like a full-size cooler, and sent me home with it after I had to work. So for me, it's like we would have that meal on Thanksgiving, but we would have that meal a bunch more times with no stakes or drama. So for me, the food is everything because it's always been separate from the day.
See,
like the day doesn't do much for me.
See, the day is interesting to me because we get food that we don't otherwise have. And for me, it's increased in importance for me and since my grandmother passed in 2015 because I always spent Thanksgiving with my mom's side of the family. And obviously Fluffy is my mom's mom. And my grandmother had this weird thing where she had 3 daughters and she taught herself to cook after being raised by someone who had to work full time as a cook in a hospital who never really cooked at home. So my grandmother didn't really know how. So she taught herself with a Betty Crocker cookbook that she got at her wedding. And she taught me how to make pies for Thanksgiving. This was like her big contribution in addition to what you would normally expect at Thanksgiving, and wouldn't teach any of her daughters. I don't know why, but it was like a thing that we did together every Wednesday before Thanksgiving. I would go to her house and we would make pies together, and I would kind of dissent from her directions. And like, for example, I put aluminum foil on the crust before it goes in to keep it from burning. She did not like that. I would have to hide it.
Nope.
She thought that was unnecessary, et cetera, et cetera. So I still, now that she's passed, I make all the pies myself now. And I should add that my grandmother's birthday is usually falls, as it does this year, in the week of Thanksgiving. So it's a time that's really emotional for me because I obviously miss her a lot. And I feel like a strong connection to her through food even now. So when I make the pies, it'll be in some ways more special even than Thanksgiving because it's like my time to really think about her and remember her and this thing that we shared. And we also made pasta cheech together, which is like chickpea pasta dish. So if I like smell frying garlic and paprika in my house even now, it's like, oh wow, she's like here with me. That's how I feel. So I feel like that's what's really special about the holiday to me, like the connection to her and to my mom too. Like my mom makes cranberry bread and things that we don't have other times in the year. So like we don't really have Thanksgiving other times of the year. And I love stuffing as well. My mom makes it with Bell seasoning. I don't know if that's like a standard, but like I don't have, like when I smell Bell seasoning, I'm like, oh wow, it's Thanksgiving. Like I don't have that any other time, that spice. I don't know what kind of like stuffing you get involved in.
None. I'm not involved at all. I mean, I am as disengaged from this meal as like just about every other meal that is like prepared by my family. I think part of it is our Thanksgiving meal was the same composition wise as every other family meal that we had.
That's interesting.
So we didn't have extra people for the most part. And so part of it for me too is my mom tended to work those days. So in a lot of ways, it was an extra tedious day of waiting for her to come home, right? Because she was out saving lives and doing important things. And we were like, oh, this is such a drag. Like mom's at work.
Right.
And this was in the era of like, don't call mom to see if she's going to be late. Just stick it out. So that piece of it for me, like there is the essence of the Thanksgiving meal, which could be transported to any other time. And that works just as well for me.
Yeah.
And it's changed. Like my brother and family who live far away used to come out for big holidays, and they don't anymore. They spend those holidays at their home. So it's like Thanksgiving is actually less of a meal. Like there are fewer people than there would be at other times when he's visiting. So the day itself, not a big deal, but I love the food. I know that it has almost nothing to do with what actually happened almost 400 years ago. And I think in a lot of ways, like we would all be served by Kit's lesson where she explains like what was really going on.
Absolutely.
She's right. Cranberry sauce should only come from a can. I don't know why you would have it any other way. That's a strong opinion that I hold very close. Would I feel... If I was Maude Newton, would I feel nervous going into Thanksgiving? Yes.
I would too. I mean, but I think what she would do, and again, I don't know her, but having read this book and like, I read this book a week ago and I've been sitting with this book for a week. So it's like really been on my mind. I've really been thinking about it. I think what's interesting about this book is like, obviously her biological family is like the center of this book, but you can also tell from her acknowledgments and everything else in the book that like chosen family is really important to her. So I would hope that if she viewed this as a time when being around family is difficult, which I know it is for a lot of folks, like this could also be a time to kind of celebrate your chosen family or be with loved ones. Like the fact that Friendsgiving has become a popular thing in our lifetime, I think is an interesting sign of kind of the importance or rise of these chosen family networks as much as the family that you're born to.
When I was looking at kind of how to summarize this book, I think looking at the headers of the sections is helpful. The actual publisher's summary for this book is very long, and I think not worth reading because I think at points it gets into detail that we can talk about later. But this is a book that is part memoir, part study of contemporary genealogy, and I think part American history. Does that sound right to you?
Yes, I think so. And I think that I want to read actually the last paragraph of the book first to kind of set the table for us kind of going through this book, because I think it sort of kind of gets at what she's doing or like what she wants to happen in this book. Earlier in the book, she says, to understand ourselves, we need to understand our ancestors. So I think that that's a really important sort of thesis statement for what's driving her here. But this is the last paragraph of the book. Spending time with my ancestors is exciting and scary, joyful and sad, expansive to the edges of the universe, and confining as the pain in my jaw. Grappling with their legacies is something I know I will never do perfectly. Making this reckoning as explicit as possible releases me from the idea that I will ever be free of this history. My understanding of the power of all our ancestors for each of us and all of us will continue to shape in me as long as there is breath in my body, at least that long. So I think what she's getting at is sort of like understanding what is the legacy of family history and that relationship to the individual. Both your individual history and how we can like live in the world now, or like we understand ourselves.
I think what sticks out about this book is there are a number of eccentric and exceptional characters in her story, right? But I also think anyone could find that. I do think anyone who had any kind of ability to do basic genealogical work, and some people are cut off from their families, and she does talk about that through a process such as adoption, or they are descendants of people who suffered through or did not make it through a genocide, right? So there are reasons, but I think like it takes someone who is as perceptive as she is to write this book versus like her family is extraordinarily interesting. Yes. I think you could do like micro historical close-up studies of lots of people. It's like the talent of the person writing it more than the person themselves. It is worth noting, I listened to an interview with her, and this surprised me. She is a writer. She has been a blogger for over 20 years. She has a day job that is not writing. Like, she works in the legal publishing space, and I find that very interesting because this book, I think, pretty clearly took a long time, and she's been writing alongside a separate career, but she is not a full-time writer.
Right. She actually talks about that in the book when she's talking about her relationship to her own father. And at this point, I just want to offer a trigger warning that we will be referencing issues surrounding sexual assault that come up in sort of like the genesis of this book, or in a really important personal motivation for her to explore her family history. So I just want to share that initially. So if this is going to be harming to you, please check us out on the next episode or skip ahead quite a bit. But she says early in the book that something that prompted her was that she was sexually molested as a child by her stepfather. Her parents had a very acrimonious marriage, violence. Her mother became an evangelical, like running a church out of their house in Miami. Her dad is an attorney. They get divorced. Her mom gets remarried. She is molested by this person, immediately tells her mom what happens. And her mom comes into her room later that night with the father and says, so we figured out what happened. The demons, were attached to this bed because we were giving shelter to a sex worker who we were trying to help. And that's what made your stepdad do this. Don't worry, it was demons. Do you have any questions? And she says, I have no questions. But this leads her as an adult to then go back into her family history and kind of explore threads that have been dropped by her mom and grandmother, particularly linked to a man, her great-grandfather, whose name is Charlie Bruce, who killed someone with a hay hook in Texas and then ends his life in a mental hospital. So she wanted to understand what happened. And long story short, he accidentally, or like in self-defense, stabbed his own best friend, who was upset with him because he refused to testify in his defense in a trial over when this man attempted to rape his own daughter. And so this is a really powerful moment for her, because actually what she discovers is someone in her ancestry who was actually willing to stand in defense of a child in a similar situation that she herself had been put in. And I think it was a moment of reckoning. That's the kind of juxtaposition and reckoning of like putting her own story in conversation with the family story, to kind of say like, wow, it was possible for someone even decades before to meet this moment in a way that was supportive and defensive of a child, and not, as her mother was, defensive of her stepfather. So I think that was like, she makes that connection in the first chapter. And I think that's a really important kind of model for what she's kind of trying to do then in the whole thing.
I also think the first paragraph where you meet Maud Newton, and you also learn that Maud is not the name that was given to her by her parents. It's a chosen name. And we can talk more about why she chooses to do that. A lot of this book is also about the fact that there are uncanny similarities between Maud and her father that are partially explained by genetics and partially explained just by virtue of upbringing, right? Like she mentions that they look a lot alike. They walk in a similar way. She has a similar way of carrying on conversations that spills over into her writing. And then you basically flip the page and you learn that ideologically they are very different, that he harbors a lot of sentiments that are racist and that he is racist. And she has worked really hard to separate herself from him. So a thread that goes through the book is sort of, there are components of genetics that are real, right? That like shape your eye color, that have different ways that we're going to influence how you walk through the world. And then there's all these other factors. Like her father is kind of a great character, air quotes, in the book, because he pitches marriage to Maud's mother by saying that they would make good children genetically, like that they would have smart children because of their two pedigrees coming together. And he actually tries to stop the divorce by showing his wife a family tree. So he's kind of got this like interesting connection to ancestry. A character who lurks in this book, who I find fascinating, is like the unspoken sister. The fact that someone else comes out of this family who is openly not curious about any of these things, does not want to write about any of these things, and out of respect for her sister, Newton doesn't talk about her. And I listened to an interview where she further expands and says that her sister's reaction to this project was like pride in a sibling and like disinterest in the rest. And I find that really fascinating, because I like that she respects her enough to not include her in here. And yet there is sort of, a missing piece of this, of like, both of you came out of the same genetic pot and yet you're so different.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's interesting. I think it says to me that they're choosing to process in different ways, because like essentially what's happening in this book is that she's looking at genealogy as a way to process in many ways like the trauma of her own experience. So I don't know that we necessarily like, it's interesting the sister doesn't want to do it, but it's also like, this is so much about her relationship with herself that she kind of doesn't, I didn't really feel the absence of the sister's perspective, because so much of it is about her and how she's kind of thinking about all of these things. And I thought it was interesting. I mean, the sister appears like only in a handful of moments in the book, like when she's recalling a fight her parents had and how she felt herself, to your point about feeling similar to her dad. She has a flash of anger and almost throws a phone at her sister across the room in a way that the dad had just been throwing things, or the mom. And she's like, oh my God, in that moment as a child is like, wow, am I just like my parents? Mm-hmm. And I thought that was an interesting moment, because I think that's kind of what's driving a lot of genealogy is like, well, am I like any of these people? And she has chapters about epigenetics, or like, is trauma or traits passed down, and citing a lot of research on that. And I think that's a very real kind of concern about like researching your family tree. Like, do you want to know about some of this stuff? And it's not, I think sometimes the way people think about genealogy is like, if you see an Ancestry.com ad, there's one that's like, I found out that I'm, descended from George Washington, which is like,
Yeah.
okay. Or like only exceptional cases. Or, I was like looking at some Kennedy related stuff for my Taylor Swift PowerPoint presentation. And I was like, okay, like there are so many people obsessed with like relating themselves to what's considered to be an exceptional family. But what do you do if like actually what's in your family tree is like trauma and people that you don't necessarily want to be affiliated with? And actually that's the part of this book that I related to the most, honestly.
No, like I think part of why like the protection of the sister really sticks out to me, and the decision to act as if she's not a player in some way in this larger family story, is this is a book that exposes a lot. It's a book that goes deep into people that she finds to be morally repugnant, who are her ancestors. But that comes right up to the present, right? Mm-hmm. Like she has a father who has since had children with another person, and she has younger step siblings who are out in the world, right? Like there's a lot about him. There's a lot about his parents, about, generations that are further back, that is very laid bare. And then there's this person who's kind of not covered at all. I know that part of this is like a certain kind of cultural upbringing. I was really shocked by some of the ways that she writes about people in her family, because to me, it's like, that's private. And I know that that is like a culturally learned impulse, but there are so many things in this book that like, part of what motivates her is her family's own reaction to her asking questions. She says, Grandma's horror at my curiosity fueled my persistence. And part of me cheers that on, and part of me also kind of has this feeling of, you may not like what you turn up and you might be further burdened by things, right? Yeah. And that's a very real challenge. And to then air it to people is a choice, right? Like it's not like she equally protects people who are living versus people who are dead. She's made value judgments about certain people, and it's like they're fair game.
You sound sort of defensive of the people that she's aired grievances on. Like, do you think she was unfair to anyone who's still living?
My personal opinion, I mean, I don't know any of these people, but I think when you are a person who is doing a genealogy about a family filled with unreliable narrators, and you're making connections between yourself and them, I do think there's this part of me that doesn't question the overall project. This is a brutal accounting of people who are still alive. And that did take me aback a little bit. Yeah. Like there are people who have done things where they harmed her, right? And the stepfather is not named in a way that I think would be like legally questionable. But I think there are things about people in this book who have other relatives that gave me pause, right? And I think part of that is cultural upbringing, what you're trained to think is like public versus private. But it did surprise me at quite a few turns in the book.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, I think in a lot of ways, the way people treat, if you have a family history that is troubling or problematic, I think there's a lot of cultural training to be silent about it, or, and if people are still alive, it's like, well, I'm not going to say anything because they, live in the world and what have you. I think with her dad, I don't have a problem with whatever she says about him because it's so overwhelmingly toxic about his racism and like the fact that he would color over black faces in children's books because he was so racist. And he believed slavery was a good system that should have continued. Like, I don't really care if that guy feels hurt that that's out there, because it seems like he was pretty public about that in his life. And the mom, I guess, like, it seems she thanks her in the acknowledgments, which I thought was interesting. She's the last person she thanks and sort of dedicates the book to, which is interesting because she is very candid about, the difficulty of they were out of touch for many years because of the abuse and the mother's reaction to it. And then they kind of get back in touch when she's like bringing up questions about family history. But, it seems like that was fraught as well. Like, I guess my reaction to it is probably colored by my own family history, which is like, there's a lot of shame that goes on in genealogy where it's like, if you have trauma in your past, you shouldn't talk about it. And when I was first reading this book, I was remembering when I first graduated college, I had this job at the Harvard History Center. And my family goes back, my dad's family in Hartford, like 100 something years. And I was asked to go like answer a research question. I go into the photo morgue of the Hartford Times, which is a newspaper that hasn't existed since like 1974 or something. And I'm looking through these like biographical folders and I see the name Borden Mahoney. And I was like, oh my, like totally gave me pause. That's my grandfather. Now he died in the 70s. I never knew him. But what I know of him is that he was a horrifically abusive person, dealt with alcoholism his whole life. Like, I'm sure he had some positive traits, but like, I've only been living with like the outcome of a lot of his choices. Like, I have seen the impact he had on people. And we don't talk about him. I don't know much about him other than like things that he's done negatively. So it was really weird to then like open this folder and be like, oh, these are photos of a person that is sort of a person we have chosen to make a ghost. Like, we don't talk about them. Like, we don't deal with their history. I don't like pay homage to him. So I kind of understand, like, in some ways, feeling that shame of like, oh, maybe I shouldn't speak on someone who also doesn't deserve my protection based on how he chose to behave when he was alive.
No, and I don't think it's about protecting people who have done good things or bad things, but I think that this is a book that is, in a lot of ways, not really about reconciliation. That's my opinion. I think this is a reckoning, and I think that this is a way of like digging down into the truth. And I think it's also like, it's totally a valid choice that we start and end with, you know, she has this connection to her father that, you know, can't be severed. There's a genetic connection, but she has the choice as an adult to not have a relationship with him. Like, that is something that she can do. And it's her father's kind of warning. He says to her, it's serious to cut your roots. Better think about it long and hard. And that's really what this book is. I don't see this, though, as a step toward reconciling anything except within herself. Like, I think that this book allowed her to reconcile competing ideas about her genealogy. I don't think that in a lot of families, this would be a toolkit to then have intra-family reconciliation. And that's probably not a goal for a lot of people. That's probably not important to a lot of people. But again, I think it takes a lot of unraveling to undo an idea of like airing dirty laundry, right? Like, and that obviously comes from a cultural place. But I think for many people of different backgrounds, this idea of being this open about these stories at the depth and level she is would feel really uncomfortable.
I'm sure. Yeah, I agree. Like, I think it was hard. It's been hard in the past week to be sitting with her project and be thinking about it with your own history. Because I think actually what she's doing, like, I agree that she's not interested in reconciliation, and the reckoning is really the core of it. And I think it's a specific reckoning for like white families to deal with a long history in which your family might be directly related or engaged in things like slavery or indigenous violence, or, you know, any number of things that you might not be proud to claim as a person living in 2022. And sort of like, how do you reckon with that? And I think, you know, she admits her own complicity and, you know, as a child repeating racist jokes and sort of her shame at that now. And when she talks about, like, she has her own ancestor who was accused of witchcraft, which was interesting. Her name was Mary Bliss Parsons, who I guess was one of the founders of Northampton, Massachusetts, ?
Yes.
And
well, is
part of that family, I guess. And, you know, basically tells her story, or I think she kind of says, like, initially I thought it was cool to be descended from someone who was accused of a witch. Like, honestly, that was my childhood dream after reading Witch of Blackbird Pond. But then after doing research with a database I didn't know existed of Black inhabitants of the Connecticut River Valley, which was created just a few years ago. But she finds that, you know, like, people in town didn't like this woman. But then essentially this woman and her family conspire to punish an enslaved woman for having spread rumors about her. So instead of a story that she told herself of like, oh, like, people just couldn't handle my ancestor and accused her of witchcraft, it's like, actually, this is also a story about white supremacy and like being complicit of like blaming or punishing Black women in a community. And she has to deal with that. And also, like, this all took place on land that was owned by indigenous people. So it's like, that's a lot. Like, what do you do with that?
She's also surprised by that story, and she's surprised by her visit to the Joseph Parsons homestead. Like, she actually gets to go to a place that was owned by like another descendant of her ancestors in Massachusetts. I think part of what is taking her aback is there are people who have had a lot of privilege and power, and that wasn't really talked about. Like, part of where this connects with us covering Kit Kittredge, right? Like, if you meet Kit's family in 1930, 1931, things are still pretty good. By 1934, things have changed tremendously. She has these family members, and she has, like, you know, her oldest family photo is the family members with the so-called hungry horse, right? Like the horse that is visibly starving, that is with her family members going back over 100 years. And she has these stories about like hardscrabble life in Texas and sees herself as a Southern girl. And then she finds this line through her mother, Surprise, that goes back to like the quote unquote founding of this town in Massachusetts. She also finds out separately that some people had made investments that made them extremely wealthy. And I think that that's kind of disorienting for her, because even as a baseline story of like, I am a person from Texas, my family wasn't well off. It's like, well, here's actually, you know, all these moments where that doesn't actually match up to the truth.
And I think that's important. And I admire her candor in owning all of this, because I think, you know, her point is, at one point she says, the power of making things personal is really important in this moment. And I take that to mean like in a climate where a lot of white people don't understand like why reparations are important or why we're having that conversation or why it's so fraught. I think her surfacing, you know, different degrees of privilege or different things that have happened like many generations removed demonstrates like how like wealth and opportunities and all these things get inherited in ways that are like do stack the deck against people who are not white presenting, essentially. But nobody wants to own that, because as she says in the book and like in interviews and things after, you know, people say like, well, I wasn't alive when slavery was legal, so therefore why do I have to be responsible for this? And I think her book is really an excellent kind of model of really thinking through that, like her navigating this process of, you know, I feel responsible, or I feel like I need to acknowledge and talk about my own family history to understand kind of my place in the present, or what is expected of me to help dismantle white supremacy.
There's so many layers to what she is trying to either understand about people in the past or what she's trying to understand about herself. And she breaks this down by doing like old-fashioned like pen and paper genealogy. She uses paper sources like photographs and has people do research, or she does research herself. There's also an entire section on like nature and nurture, physicality, temperament, spirituality. And I think there are a lot of times where she struggles with something that a lot of us do, which is, okay, I've now found 5 ancestors who did this thing, and there's this echo of this in me, like her kind of yearning for something spiritual. And what does she make of that? What struck me the most at the end of this book is, you know, like as historians, you always get taught like you have to look back, but you have to live life forwards, right? Mm-hmm. Like that famous Kierkegaard quote. But at the same time, it's like what really comes out to me as an adult person who also doesn't have a biological child, so much of this is about her thinking through the family she's made and then looking back at what she would consider biological family. And I do think that that's a piece that would have made this book different. It's not the book that she was going to write or anyone was going to write in her situation, but there is a lot of like, we are this accumulation of things that came before. And yet you also get a sense that her relationship with her stepdaughter, that this daughter is really important to her. And that was something I was kind of struggling with too. It's like we can choose family, we can make all of these decisions, but we're also still kind of obsessively primed in this culture to look at genetics, to look at people who like had the children that had our parents and like so far back. And I think that's something that kind of pings between the chapters of this book for me. Like, how would this book read differently if she had a different relationship with children?
Like if she had biological children, you mean?
Yeah, and I don't say that to minimize in any way the relationship she has with the person that she calls her child, right? The daughter of the man that she marries. But she makes that distinction as well, right? Like that person does not share genetic material with her. Like she doesn't look at that girl and wonder if she has some of her father in her. Like that's a hugely important piece of like a person who is obsessed with reading back into their ancestry and like trying to understand themselves.
Yeah, or like I guess why she chose not to have biological children, if that was a choice. I don't know if it was or wasn't. I also think it would have been interesting to hear more about, there's an aside at one point when she's writing about cousin Maud, for whom she adopted that nickname, and she, gets into who that, like, had grown up romanticizing this person who never got married, was an architect who designed her own house, and allegedly threw pepper in her husband's face when she left him, and then like lived this independent life. And this person, she says, got interested in the genealogy of their family, and then makes an aside that's like, as many women who were like childless and unmarried in my family history were the ones who safeguarded genealogy through the generations. Like they're the ones who wrote things down, they continued it. So it's interesting to think about like how your positionality in the family might either afford you the time or like interest in documenting this history, or you don't have the time because you're literally like caring for children who you've given birth to who are going to carry it on. Like, where do you fit into this, and what are your choices, and how did you make them, I guess?
I think her ruminations on Maud were especially striking to me in thinking about like reliable and unreliable carriers of her family history, because there's this story, right? The one you just mentioned about like throwing the pepper in the guy's eye. And she meets descendants who are connected to that man. Like she gets either what she hopes will be corroboration, and she actually gets a completely different story, right? Like we've learned so far that the people who told her the pepper story are not reliable, that they are maybe not good people, that they, like tend toward exaggeration. But she likes that story. And then we hear something completely different and really heartbreaking in a different way, that the man did try to reconcile with this woman and was shut away. And that the original Aunt Maud, great Aunt Maud, never knew that happened. And the way that she writes about that felt really telling to me, because she tells us she doesn't like that story. She doesn't want that story. That doesn't feel, air quotes, true to her. So she's not going to keep it. And that was one of the moments I kind of took pause and took inventory, because there's so much criticism of the way that other people have received family stories. And I appreciate that she's laying it out for us in that way. But it's like, well, you're just telling us that like you don't like that truth, so you're not going to keep it. And I respect that when she learns other things about Maud, she does catalog them. But that was a really kind of strange thing for me. Like, well, I don't really like this, so it doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel valid.
Yeah, I think that is a moment that sort of like gives pause. Although I think the fact that it's in the book, it doesn't like make it better, I guess. But I guess it allows me to temper it, that she's sort of like putting it all on the table and is like, well, I don't really like hearing this for whatever reason. Doesn't explain why. Other than it's not the story she grew up with. But yeah, I mean, I think it kind of goes back to that idea of like, we tell ourselves stories in order to live. And the original intent of that quote was that, people are delusional and they will create whatever delusions they need to get through like the 70s in Joan Didion's case. And so I kind of feel like her family stories are in some ways the stories that she needs, not just to live, but to understand how she's living, and how she looks the way she does, and how her eyes have developed a similar issue to her great grandma or whatever. But in a way, it's like she's making transparent her choice to veer towards delusion. And I don't know if we're supposed to say that's good that you've made that transparent, or, be critical. I think at the end of the day, it's like, we're never going to know in a big way about history, but definitely about family history, like what air quotes like really happened in a lot of cases. So then I guess what we're left with is like the stories we tell about it, which makes me think about that documentary Stories We Tell by Sarah Polley from whatever 2015 or some year, about like the stories that she'd received about her own mother, who had since passed, so she couldn't participate in this, but kind of interviewing her family members about all of these competing stories. And it's like, well, what do you do with all of these competing stories? Like, do you keep searching for what's real? Like, do you, as Maud does, like take some things, leave the rest? Like, I don't know.
Well, I think part of it for her, what really kind of stood out to me is this, like, there's this kind of relentless disappointment with what she's learning. You know, she knows that her father harbors these racist beliefs about Black people in their own time, and that, as you say, he was pro the institution of slavery. And I think she goes into researching her family's connection to slavery with an almost hope that it's trumped up, that it's less than what her racist father and others were hoping. And yet she actually finds quite the opposite, to a degree where she says, I found so much enslaving that I kept losing track. And where I think that this book is an interesting case study for historians, as you say, like, she doesn't like that story. It's not a story that helps her to live about her great aunt Maud. She's very candid about Maud's racism in another context. When she gets accounts of some of the people in her family who were part of a system of slavery or sharecropping, they also have stories that help them to live about their own hard work ethic. And I think she's very quick to dismiss those as just sort of like an outright function of racism, as, you know, feels right and feels morally and feels righteous in our own moment. But I don't know what we get out of just banging a drum and saying, like, I'm disappointed in my ancestor, right? I don't know, like, that's where the reconciliation piece, I think, is not there. I think it's a very strong reckoning. I think actually really making sense of, like, so what does that say about me? What does that mean about how I have to move in the world? And how do I really truly try to make peace with who those people were? Because you can't cut them off. They've already been cut off. They're dead.
Right.
There's no actual reconciling there, except maybe within yourself.
Well, I mean, does she have to reconcile with them?
Well, it's not my book title. It's hers. I mean, I don't know, but I don't think that there is much space here for reconciling who they were and how they lived. Right. I think there's like a celebration of certain people and then kind of a parade of disappointments. Like, this person also disappointed me, as opposed to, like, they are a person with a set of beliefs in another period of time.
That's interesting. I mean, I guess I'm just reacting because I didn't read it that way necessarily. Like, I kind of read this as like a series. It's interesting that she writes about being a blogger, because I think that's telling in the style of this book. Like, it almost seems like blog posts that are kind of like put together on all these different topics. But I also read at one point she says she's a Buddhist, and that was interesting to me too, in the part of the book where she's talking about a spiritual reckoning, and that she meditates and she makes an altar to her ancestors after, like, navigating whether or not that's appropriative and all this stuff. And I kind of, like, read her passing through these ancestors, and the end of the book is like, ancestry and your exploration of family history is something best approached almost like a meditation, that, like, it's a moving target. Like, you might meditate on someone and be really thinking about, you know, their complicity in white supremacy, and then the next day, you know, something else happens in your life and it makes you think about it from a different perspective. So I don't know if, like, this is her final word on these people or how she's reconciled with it. But I think almost like at the end of the book, what I took from it was that she's like, well, I'm going to, like, be living with these stories, and maybe, like, they will change over time, or, like, how I can be in relationship to the way that their histories make me feel can change over time. Like, I don't know. I didn't necessarily see it as, like, her, I mean, she certainly is casting judgment on people, but I don't know if that means, like, she's not able to see them as three or, like, I guess, two-dimensional people.
It's a fine line, right? Like, how do you try to fully empathize with them without sounding like you are permissible of their behavior, right?
Yeah.
Because her father took a different approach, was just like, I think this was all great behavior. I wish they had done it more, right? That kind of thing. But I liked the ending where she is trying to make sense of, like, ways to keep ancestors part of her life, and kind of notes the popularity of things like cocoa and the way that cultural institutions like Day of the Dead have been getting like more mainstream, right? Like that more people are starting to understand that. And honestly, in the case of American Girl, appropriate that by making an American Girl outfit that you can purchase. There was a conversation on a page on Instagram where people were honestly furious about that American Girl, which hadn't really paid much attention to like, you know, cultural celebrations outside of like very like big ones, especially Christmas, were suddenly like marketing a Day of the Dead outfit for a doll. Like a lot of people thought that was actually pretty offensive,
right?
That someone would just buy that and treat it like a costume.
Yeah, totally. And I actually think that was an interesting part of the book where she's kind of like, where do white people go when they want to feel a part of something bigger than themselves? And perhaps they're dislocated from religion, but they don't have like the ancestor worship traditions of other groups. Like, and her answer is like, don't appropriate from other groups, but also like, is family history a path to like finding meaning in your life through other means? Like, I think it is kind of an interesting commentary on our times of like, okay, if like she is not religious, if religion is not a source of meaning and comfort, can your ancestry be? Or like, can it be a meaning making, you know, instrument in your life in the same way that a spiritual life is for other people?
We also learned quite a bit about kind of her exploration into genetic genealogy and like practices of keeping dead ancestors. And she learns through her husband that there are places in the world where they're only kept for a few years. Like you get a short period of time to be to be buried, and then it's like you are dissolved in a pit after that. And that is shocking to her as well, like as an environmental move.
Was shocking to me. And also the fact that a grave in Greece, I think, goes for about $200,000.
See, and I read that as, I think that it's important to have a place that you can visit, that you can think about that person. And I don't think that that has to be in a cemetery, though I think that it can be. Sometimes there's like different places you can go to feel close to someone. I am perfectly fine. Like if someone, you know, and it was my choice, like dissolved me in a vat of acid, like that does, because I don't believe that I'm my body. Right, so the idea as a claustrophobe of being buried is very upsetting to me. Same. So I don't want to be buried. But I also don't like the idea of being lit on fire. So I have a different path picked out. I liked that part of the book. I also like that she had something different and interesting to say about the intersection of forensics and genealogy, other than like it's all good or it's all bad.
Yeah, what I actually thought about you reading that part of the book and wondered what you made of it.
I read a book several years ago, and it was called Chase Darkness with Me, and it's by a person who has since really there's been a reckoning with him in the kind of like true crime space because of I'll say alleged just because like who knows, but probable actions he committed against women and harassment. But he was a huge proponent, along with Paul Holes, who is another like big person in the true crime world, of just getting everyone to do a DNA test and everyone getting their genealogy out there. And I think they very recklessly just kind of went out there and said like, everyone should be doing this. Everyone should be uploading their DNA to websites. And after catching the Golden State Killer, just kind of this like huge push, like everybody should be doing this. This is absolutely a good thing. And I do like that she is aware of the fact that like you are compromising so many people's privacy if you don't have control, and you know you don't have control when you trust a random website. Like, why is Ancestry.com worth as many billions as it is? Because it's a treasure trove of genetic information that can be manipulated. And so I liked the way that she talked about that in a morally nuanced way, because I've also listened to interviews of people who have lost someone in their lives, and for decades the crime has gone unsolved. And for them, they know that there is a DNA profile, and they feel like genetic genealogy could like solve the case because it has. So I see that tension there, right? I think there is like a very real tension. In a perfect world, that information wouldn't be exploited, but we know that it is.
Yeah, for sure. I like that too, and how she went to visit that professor who was like working with the FBI question mark on that system.
Yeah.
Like that seemed kind of sketchy, but I mean, I like that she pushed back against him about like the necessity for everyone to participate in that kind of database.
Has someone in your family done this? Like, is your DNA out there?
Yeah, this is a crazy story. But so speaking of my grandfather, who I, again, never knew, I never knew either of my grandfathers, but the one who I called Bad Grandpa died in the 70s. Again, not a good person. I'm not like, missing some great qualities, like universally not a great person. So he passed away in the 70s in, I don't know, a couple of years ago. His daughter, so my aunt, decided to do one of these tests and was contacted by a stranger who was like, I think my mom, who is now passed, was a illegitimate child of your dad. And like, I already knew of like one. He fathered a child in his teens, and then like promptly they lived in the same city, never saw her, had anything to do with her, didn't support her. And she predeceased him, but now apparently there was like there's like others out there. So it's like, wow, that was wild. And what's crazy, and this gets back to like family history, is like that was a secret in and of itself, that my aunt was contacted and she was like, oh my God, no one must know. And it's like, but why? I'm really one of those people who's like, not to like be quoting Brene Brown all over the place, but I do think the idea that you're only as sick as your secrets is true. And this idea that like we have a vested interest in keeping secrets just for appearances, I think is such a toxic thing. So like I have no qualms in sharing this story, but I will also say that like this is something I'm not even like air quotes supposed to know. Like somebody told me and was like, why aren't we publicly discussing this in the family? Like this woman has passed and it's just tragic that she never got to know her father, and it's like we had nothing to do with this, and yet like certain members of my family are like, but we must keep this secret, we must keep this on the DL, and it's like, why? I don't know. So I mean, apparently some of my DNA is out there. I have not personally done this, and I don't really know that I will. I mean, who knows what that would turn up at this point, but have you done this?
I don't want to say I don't need to, because I know how they work, but both my parents have done it independently. So I have a pretty, and I run our Ancestry.com account. So I have a very good idea of like what's out there. Like obviously I would, and my brother has done it as well. So like enough people in my family have done it to give us like an amazingly homogenous picture. We get between the three of them between 98 and 99% being from the place we now call England.
Okay.
Like basically with all of the results, they tried to be kind of interesting and be like, well, some people might be from like this part of the island. All of my genetic lines in what has turned up thus far are like shockingly homogenous. Like they were on the, like both lines, like they were on the island and they were like cool with whoever was nearby. They then in separate like timelines came to what is now the United States, and they were like, there's just not a lot of variety there. I will put it that way. For me, I think what this book and what all of this stuff comes down to is like, do you think your ancestors are a mirror or reflection of you? Do you think that the things that they have done say something about you? And I like that this book let me think about that a little bit more. I would like to say that I'm sort of liberated and like feel, invested or willing to share things about like certain aspects of my family story. But the truth is like, I'm not. Like I wouldn't. And it's not, I think, always a function of feeling like ashamed or feeling a certain kind of way. I think part of where this book is productive is it strikes at that chord of like, so why do you feel like family is private? Because part of me does feel like that is the value of family, right? That there are some people who know things about you. And I've been reflecting on this, like a man went on TikTok and told his daughter in a TikTok that he's not her biological father, like a little girl, and filmed it and put it on TikTok. And I think however you define family, right? Like whoever is in that circle, having things that are private but not a secret is part of what binds you to family. However you make that up. And to me, it's like that is a very obvious example of a person who doesn't value the bonds of family.
That TikToker, yeah, that's horrific. That should never have happened. Oh my God.
And not because he's, quote, not her biological father. That's not why. To me, it's like that disrespect to film your child in a vulnerable moment. Like, that to me is where, like, there are really gray lines around this for me of, like, what is worth keeping to people who are close and what is worth writing a book about. Mm-hmm. Granted, she's an adult. She's making a choice. But she is making choices for other people about their family story being out there.
Yes. I think she's making choices, and it's important to note that, like, I think she's someone who has made very clear boundaries in her life with people and disconnected from her dad and perhaps other relatives, and, has made this decision to kind of do this inventory for herself about how she's navigated stories she grew up with the truth of it, and then what she's left with both as an individual, and then suggesting largely for, like, white society, like, what do we do with our links to, like, larger national stories and histories, and how do we reckon with that? I think it's interesting. I think I hear you about privacy. I don't know if that's what would define family for me, but I think I can't really see outside of my own experience, which is, for me, privacy was something that was weaponized to hide a lot of really bad behavior and make other people complicit in that. And I don't believe in that at all. So to me, it's more like, is it your story to tell? And if so, you have a right to do what's right for you. And I think part of her own recovery might be sharing her own personal history, in which case keeping her sister out of it is a respectful choice to her sister. So maybe part of what should have happened is, did she, and we don't know if she checked in with her half siblings about what she was going to do, or if she's in relationship with them. But, I think she ultimately is responsible for what's in this book. And it seems like she's lands the book in a place of, like, she's responsible for it. And I don't know, I guess it seems like it was a worthy endeavor for her. It's interesting that, like, you would mine your family history with family that you've disconnected from. Like, I'm not interested in my dad's history because I'm not in communication with a lot of that side of my family, and that's my choice. So for me, like, family is like mutual aid and, like, how you treat other people. So it's biological, but it's also chosen for me. So I don't know. This book gave me a lot to think about. As a credit to her, it's like I've been thinking about this book all week, and, no matter how you feel about it, I think it's thought-provoking, if nothing else.
She's an excellent writer. Mm-hmm. Like, I would recommend this book to a lot of people. I would probably, like, read through sections of it again. Like, she has great turns of phrases. There are a few parts that I would maybe, like, skip over if I had to go back through it. I think a tremendous feat of this book is there are so many different people in it. And I recently put a book down. An author who I love had a thriller come out. It was my book of the month. And literally the second page had a huge family tree. And within 3 pages, I'd met too many characters. I was like, I'm not in a headspace to deal with this.
Wow.
As I was reading this book, and there are so many people in this book, I never once felt confused. And I think that is a huge credit to her as a writer, that there are repeats in names. There are different kinds of grandparents who pop up through the book. And I never felt disoriented, like, wait, who is she talking about? And that is really hard to pull off, because in a novel that's just about impossible, like, there is a family tree. I found I never really needed to look at it. I looked through the photos. I never felt confused.
Yeah.
And that's a huge accomplishment.
I'm still in the midst of watching the Lord of the Rings movies. I'm still not done with that. It kind of stopped, but I will return to it. But I remember trying to read the books years ago, and I was like, there's such genealogies of characters in the beginning that I was like, I can't do this. Like, same with Game of Thrones. I was like, I can't take all of these people on right now. Like, I can't remember all of this stuff. So as you're saying, like, that was a major credit to her as a writer. And also that she cherry picked people to focus on, because I'm sure, like, there are way more people that she's done research on, but I think she picked really instructive or illustrative people in her family tree to kind of demonstrate or work through whatever she wanted to work through. So I think she did a good job of, like, boiling this down to some case histories in a sense.
I do feel as though we're going to give people absolute whiplash. Like, we started with Thanksgiving. We got through Maud Newton. In December, we are reading a much requested Magic Attic Club book, which I think will perhaps not have the emotional depth of
no
Maud
trauma,
Newton's writing.
We hope.
but I think we'll carry like with it a pace and like a level of fascination that I hope you will all love. I'll also probably bring my Allison doll to my recording.
Wow.
I loved the Magic Attic
Same.
Club. I thought it was really awesome. We're also going to do a watch along in December of The Cutting Edge, which I think could be, you know, like a subtitle of this book in some ways.
Yes.
So we're moving on from, you know, genealogy and family November into ice skating December. We're open to your suggestions for 2023. We hope that you will share them with us. If you want more of this, if you want more of, you know, Jessica Simpson or those kinds of things, or you want more figure skating books for 10-year-olds, like
we can do it.
All of those things are possible.
Yeah. So if you've not been on the Discord, check it out. And there will be, there are places where you can tell us what you want to do for watch alongs, for episodes, and a survey of, you know, just what we can be doing on the Patreon. So thanks in advance for filling that out. And I'm very looking forward to next month. Allison, where can people find you if they want to talk to you about anything genealogy or figure skating related?
Whew, you can find me at Ancestry Queen on Twitter. No, I'm kidding. Elon would not allow. I am at Allison Horrocks on all of the things. I don't have a blue check mark, but I would love to find you there. You can also feel free to message the show, Dolls Lives Pod on Twitter, and then Dolls of Our Lives Pod on Instagram. Mary, where should people find you?
I wish I could say at Click Kittredge on Twitter, but sadly they have been blocked.
No.
But honestly, doing the Lord's work on Twitter, good for you. On Instagram, I'm at Mimi Mahonia. That's probably the best place to find me. I'm at Mary Mahoney123 on Twitter, but it's a weird place right now.
For now.
All right. Thanks, everyone, and we will see you on the next episode.